and get started. I really appreciate people coming out this evening. I know it's a very busy time of year. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Matt Curtis. I'm the superintendent here in town. And let me just kind of tee up the evening and give a little bit of background of why we're here and what we're going to be talking about. So last year, about this time, the Board of Finance approved an expenditure of $200,000 for our Board of Education to engage with outside contractors on a large-scale facility study in hope of really developing a significant 10-year outlook for our capital needs in town. So I really think about this project with, has three main legs that I've been talking about and trying to simplify it for people. The first piece is the demography, population trends in town, population trends in our school system. We're just coming out of now, which the group will talk about tonight, what has been a significant decline in our school-based population for over a decade. That's starting to even out, so that's important information and very interesting information that will be shared tonight. The second piece we'll hear about this evening is a current condition study. So Jeff and his group went through and really assessed each of our 7 buildings. And kind of are coming up with a state of the state report on things that have been done well and things we need to think about in the future. Again, long-term goal to help us build a capital expenditure plan. The third leg of it, which we have not engaged in yet, and that's the piece that certainly will evoke the most conversation and need for community input, and that is any alternative configurations or ideas that Tecton comes up with to share with us in our community about school configurations, be it number of school buildings, grade level configurations, different ways to look at how we do business and have conversations about as we move forward and plan for the future. So that's pretty much the scope of our project. I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Wisnicki, who's the principal of Tecton Architects, and he's going to take it from there. So thank you again for coming.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Wazinski. I'm a principal at Tecton Architects. Just wanted to summarize our presentation tonight. What tonight is about is the first two pieces. We're going to go over, Patrick's going to go over the demographics and population projections, and then I'll give a kind of a high-level overview of the existing conditions, kind of our assessment. Why tonight's important is because it sets the foundation for all the options and considerations that we'll talk about kind of into the future. And how long will we be here? We're going to try to keep the presentation about 30 to 40 minutes. We're going to, again, hit the high-level points. There's a lot of data that will be posted on the website. There was a website that was created with draft versions of our previous presentations as well as our report. So here's the agenda for tonight. I'll go quickly over introductions and who's been involved to date. I'm going to outline the goals of the projects. We're going to get into, Patrick will go over demographics. I'll hit the existing conditions. We'll talk a little bit about the next steps and then hopefully have an interactive session relative to your thoughts on the status of the current schools. So we've been involved quite a bit, a lot with the leadership at the Board of Education, all the principals, the director of facilities, the facilities representatives at each school at our walkthroughs. We've had a presentation with the Board of Education, and we've also met with the facilities and enrollment task force, so they've seen kind of a more detailed look at our findings to date. So as I mentioned, I'm Jeff Wazinski, I'm the principal for the project at Tecton. Eddie Wadowski's here representing Tecton as well. He's been involved in the project. We have Malone and McBroom. Patrick's going to go over the demographic projections. And then the walkthrough included structural engineers walking through the building mechanical engineers. Derek Bride from CES is here. And then also an assessment of the site, which was completed by Fuss and O'Neill. So the goals of the project, and I know the superintendent hit most of them, but step existing conditions analysis and an assessment of the educational needs based on the existing conditions. What can and can't you do educationally in the facilities? Then we're going to identify all these improvements, capital improvements and maintenance items into this comprehensive list, develop a prioritized plan, 10-year plan, and the idea is to try to create a sustainable approach to address both the facility needs and the educational needs for the community. Talked about the demographics. The fun part will be a bit after, further into, a few months from now, where we start talking about alternative configurations and options for the community as we see them. And the idea all along the way, albeit some of this information might be a little bit dry, talking about existing conditions, it's important to kind of create this baseline understanding, because that's really, that's where we leverage all the options from here. So making informed decisions is really what we want to do, and have a clarity and the communication with the community all along the way. Ultimately, we want to deliver a tool, a long-range master plan that you can use for the future, for all of your school facilities. So, mentioned, we've been meeting monthly with leadership to review our progress. We had our presentation with the Board of Ed, Facilities and Enrollment Task Force, and then what to expect. This is kind of the first step. This is our first public forum to talk about kind of our findings, but we're also going to have other public forums to talk about options, what you think of those options. Are there options that we didn't understand or consider? And then we're going to look at refining them, and ultimately, we'll get to the selection of a preferred option. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Patrick for an overview of the demographic projections.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. My name's Pat Gallagher. I'm a planner and demographer with Mylone and McBroom, and I'm going to talk about some of the key findings from our demographic and enrollment study. And this is a more abbreviated version. There will be more information posted on the district website. So as Dr. Curtis mentioned, we're at a little bit of a turning point here in the community. There's been a drop in enrollment over the last decade. However, we're starting to see some data that's indicating that you're about to level off and start to rebound. And I'll go over some of the reasons why over the next few minutes. So one thing we've noticed is that you've experienced modest population growth over the last few years. And during the same period, many of your peer towns have been stable or flat. And why you're growing is because you've had a lot of housing construction over the last several years. Yeah. Can you hear me? Housing construction. Can everybody hear me all right? All right. We evaluated DOT population projections, and they are estimating that your population will continue to grow at a modest rate for the foreseeable future. Another trend that's impacted your enrollments in recent years is the fact that your population is aging. Your median age increased by 3 years and is now just under 45 years old. And what the data has told us is that a lot of your residents are aging in place. These are folks that bought into the community 20 or 30 years ago. They had children who went through the school system, and they're still here. However, we do see some data that is indicating that this trend is starting to reverse, and there is some housing turnover within the community. Bringing in new.
Reflect any of the recent developments on Hot Mill Street with the apartment complexes?
I'll get there. And if you wouldn't mind, folks, if we can hold our questions till the end, I'll answer probably some of these questions along the way. One of the data points that's indicating that there's starting to be more housing turnover and more young families in the community is birth data. Birth data is really the best indicator of your future elementary school enrollments, and we use it to project your kindergarten populations. And what we've seen is during the recession years, you've averaged under 170 births per year. However, over the last 4 or 5 school years, that's increased, and in 2018, you're back over 200 births per year. And the last year you experienced that high level of births to Simsbury residents was back in 2003. One of the neat things that we do is we obtain address level information from the Connecticut Department of Public Health, and that allows us to place them on a map and see if there's particular neighborhoods within the town that have a high concentration of births, and that indicates areas that have a high concentration of young families with children, and is a good indicator of where the kindergartners will be coming from 4 or 5 years from now. As you can see, this shows birth hotspots over the last 4 years, and it's really concentrated in areas that have the highest density housing. In Terriffill, in the Weetog section of town, near the Avon line, and in the Mountain Farms area. And this again is showing that there's young families with children moving to town. Another interesting fact that we found was that while the number of births has increased, you're also seeing an increasing number of families with children moving into the district after the children were born, but before they enroll in kindergarten. One of the ways that your community's changed the most dramatically in recent years is housing construction. And over the last few years, you've had about 600 new multifamily units built. and there's a significant number of units that are approved but not yet occupied, just under 500. And this development is really concentrated in a few areas of town, notably in the Latimer, Central, and Squadron Line school districts. One of the pieces of information that we wanted to take a deeper dive on is how has this impacted your school enrollments? And I'll show you a more detailed table in a few slides, but on average, each of these 600 new occupied units has produced 0.14 students per unit. So every 100 units results in 14 students enrolled in Simsbury Public Schools. Your single-family housing construction is yet to rebound from the recession. That's something we've seen in the greater region. Most towns have seen most of their new construction in the multifamily segment. We also evaluated areas of town that have high concentrations of rental housing. Areas with rental housing tend to have a more transient student population. There's greater turnover from year to year since folks have shorter-term leases, and that impacts our enrollment projections because there may be more significant variations in classes from year to year. We also evaluated your home sales. Housing turnover is really important for suburban communities like Simsbury, where I mentioned that a lot of folks are aging in place. As those folks sell their houses, they're likely to sell it to a family with young children in school. And so as that housing market recovers and more units are turned over, that's also likely to lead to an uptick in enrollment. This map shows, again, hotspots, the concentration of home sales over the last 3 years. And again, it kind of follows the density patterns within town. The highest density areas show up in the dark red. There's a lot of condos or single-family homes on small lots in the vicinity of Central School. However, we also have hotspots showing up in the Latimer Lane School District, Squadron Line, and Terriffill as well. Over the last 5 years, you've averaged about 150 new housing units, and that's driven by multifamily construction, which you can see in orange here. So most of that new construction's been in that multifamily segment. Single-family housing, which is shown in blue on this bar chart, you've historically had, pretty high levels of single-family and subdivision construction. In the 2000s, you averaged over 50 units per year. However, right now you're averaging less than 20 single-family housing units per year. We were able to obtain address-level enrollment information from the district, which allowed us to take a deeper dive on specific new multifamily apartment complexes. And this is an analysis of the number of occupied units as of October compared to the total enrollment coming from those developments in October. And what we can see is that on average, you're producing 0.14 students per unit. So again, 14 students for every 100 units of housing. But there is some variation depending on the type of development. Mill Pond Crossing, which is a condominium development, tends to have larger units, 2 and some 3 bedrooms, so therefore it has a higher enrollment per unit. A lot of the rental properties have mostly are a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Typically, we don't see a lot of students coming out of 1 bedrooms and a handful coming out of your 2 bedroom units. So you'll see lower enrollment per unit compared to the condominiums. What was interesting to us is that up to half of these students who live in these multifamily developments were already Simsbury Public School students. So while there are some new families moving to the community, there's also movement within the community to these new housing units. And I'll note that this is just based on the occupied units, and you still have a significant number of units that have been approved but not yet built, almost 500 units. And our enrollment projections do account for students coming out of those housing developments. So next I'll pivot over to enrollment trends, and here I've highlighted your peak year in red. And what you can see is that your elementary school enrollments in the green, the lowest bar, peaked first, followed by your middle school enrollments about 2 years later, and followed by your high school enrollments most recently. And this kind of pattern you'll see is also how we project the district's going to start to rebound, with your elementaries occurring first and your high school enrollments occurring last. Your elementary school enrollments have reached the bottom. In fact, this past school year was the first time that you saw an increase year over year in quite some time. Your middle school enrollments, which peaked slightly later, are still on a declining trajectory. However, we're also estimating that that's going to turn around fairly soon. Your high school enrollment peaked most recently in 2011, and has declined by the lowest amount. However, we project that that decline is going to continue going forward over the next several years. Looking at your individual elementary schools, every elementary school experienced some enrollment decline since the 2012 school year. However, not all schools declined at the same rate. The greatest declines were experienced in Terriffill, Squadron Line, and Tooten Hills, whereas the Central District stayed very stable. Which leads to our enrollment projections. So we take all of this demographic, economic, and housing information, and we develop an estimation of where we think the community is heading. And as I mentioned, we have address level information at our disposal, which allows us to more accurately account for some neighborhood trends or individual school trends. It's also important to note that these are based on underlying assumptions about future housing, future economy, and future demographic trends. And so to account for unforeseen events going out 10 years, we've developed a high, medium, and low. And the medium is really what we think is most likely to occur based on all of the data that we evaluated. So this chart here shows your total K-12 enrollment. In black is your historic enrollment, and the dotted lines on the right side of the chart show your projected enrollment. In blue is the medium. So again, what we're saying is most likely to occur, which shows the decline happening over the next few school years, though a very small decline, and then a rebound starting in 2023-24. And we've developed a high model, which accounts for some unforeseen rapid improvement in the housing market or economy, and a low model, which again accounts for an unforeseen rapid decline in the economy and housing market. But again, we don't see any data indicating that those are likely, but we prepare them just so you have some flexibility going forward. And that rebound, once it starts, is projected to increase by about 8%, reaching just under 4,300 students by 2028. And that's a level that you last saw around 2013-14, so a pretty recent past. As I mentioned earlier, your elementary schools are really leading any trend within the district. And what we've seen is that it's the first to bottom out. And this past school year, you saw that first year-over-year increase, and we're projecting that that increase is going to continue to occur over the next few years. And as those larger birth classes that I talked about over the last few years begin entering kindergarten, that's going to correspond to larger kindergarten classes and larger successive classes. We're estimating that by 2028-29, your elementary school enrollments are going to grow to just under 2,300 students, which is comparable to what you experienced back in 2010. We also prepared individual elementary school projections, and we're estimating the fastest growth in the Latimer, Squadron Line, and Central school districts, and this is really tied to all that housing construction that we've seen. We're also projecting modest increases at Tooten Hills, and Terriffill, we're projecting a stable population over the next decade. The middle school peaked a few years after the elementary schools, and so we're anticipating that that decline is going to start to level off in a few years, with a decline of about 6% over the next 4 years. However, beginning in 2023, we're projecting a rebound in enrollment as those larger elementary school classes begin entering the system, reaching just under 700 students by 2028-29. And that's a level you last saw in the 2014 school year. And finally, our high school projections. Your high school peaked most recently in 2011, and we're anticipating that that decline is going to continue over the next 7 school years, declining by a further 16% to just under 1,200 students. However, we do anticipate that the high school will begin to rebound in years 8 through 10 of our projections as those larger classes begin entering the middle school first and then later the high school. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff. And again, I'll ask you folks to hold your questions, and I'm happy to talk about these more when Jeff wraps up. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so I'm going to give a high-level overview of the yes.
I don't want to mess up the plan, but it might be a good idea to get questions on demography now when people
Sure.
just saw it.
If that's
you're okay with it.
absolutely, yeah. I'm going to stand over here, though, so make sure your answers aren't too long.
All right, any questions? All right, we'll start there and I'll get you next.
Well, how do you
Well,
factor
pass-
in homeschooling and- I'm at the grandparent stage, obviously, but how do you factor in homeschooling, computer learning, and some of that activity that's going on now?
So we did track, we didn't track homeschool enrollment, but we did track parochial, private, magnet enrollment within the town. And the projections assume that what's occurred in the recent past, really over the last 3 or 4 years, will continue for the foreseeable future. So we anticipate that whatever rate of homeschooling's occurred over that last 3 or 4 year period, that will be the same rate as in year 10 of our projections. I don't believe they were in our enrollment data set.
Homeschooling is very negligible in our community. I mean, literally a number you can count.
Well, I just want to know a couple.
Sure. Homeschooling is really a negligible number in our community. I don't recall off the top of my head what it is now, but we track it, it's a very small number.
All right, the gentleman in the gray over here.
Thank you. I noticed that the construction you included are those that are approved. I didn't see a development called Meadowwoods, which is a rather substantial, if built-out, development that would bring 300-plus units if they build everything that they intend to or hope to.
Correct. So that is one of the developments that we were tracking. They do have an approved site plan. I think it was approved back before the recession. The planning department did not indicate that that was moving forward to construction within the next year or two. If it does, it's definitely something that you'll want to revisit because it could result in a substantial number of students.
Could you speak a little bit more about the economic assumptions that you're making in terms of state and local tax policy relative to the kinds of industries that are being built in the state, the transitory nature of some of those industries? How much is that a part of your tracking?
Sure. So it's more of a macro look at economic trends. Things like town fiscal policy is not accounted for in our model. It's more so employment rate, which impacts the housing market. It's really the linkages between the economy and the housing market that impact your school enrollments the most. If the economy is good, your housing market generally is good, your sales turn over more. So that medium model that we showed really assumes a status quo for today. So again, those kind of trends that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years will continue into the foreseeable future. Anyone else?
Is this data available in the internet somewhere that we can download?
Most of the data that I presented is available. A lot of it was census information. This information for your historic enrollments is available from the state. The address level information, of course, is not a public available data set. This information, we've compiled it here. I'm sure you could get it from another source as well. But we've used a lot of public data for our housing and economic and population analysis.
presentation
Yeah,
The
yes.
presentation will be online, and you can also look up the data as well.
So
It's
all the
publicly
presentations,
available data.
to date, public presentations have been posted as well as this one will be online, so you can view it.
Sorry if I misunderstood your question.
Some of the stuff is going to be more detailed. What we have tonight is kind of a condensed version. So there is certainly a larger, correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, there's definitely
Yes, there's a lot more
versions that have a lot more
demographic
slides.
information if you wish. So,
So just looking at the school enrollment, how it went down, did you do an overlay of the faculty and staff on the pupil to teacher ratio?
I did not. No, that was
Okay.
not part of our scope.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Great. Thanks.
Okay, so the next 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, we're going to go over kind of a high-level overview of the existing conditions, our findings for each of the school facilities. So the work completed so far, just so you understand, so we went around, our team collected all the drawings, utility bills, conducted thorough walkthroughs of each of the buildings, sometimes 2, 3 times, 3 visits. The full team, structural, mechanical, electrical, architectural, site, civil. And then we analyzed all of this information, compiled it all into a report, which I'll go over the structure in a few minutes. Proposed recommendations for the deficiencies that we found. So, if there's old windows, we said replace the windows. And ultimately, we're going to develop order of magnitude costs for each. So you'll have a good, solid matrix to look at for each one of your school facilities. We also had, we held stakeholder interviews and workshop and walkthroughs with the educators to talk about how the condition or the structure of the existing conditions affects the current educational curriculum and or future. And you'll see more of that probably come to life as we develop options in the future. And then where we're at right now, and the reason why it's bolded is we're starting to get into the development of options. That'll be the topic of the next upcoming public forums. So just quickly how we organized our information. What we did is we walked through all these facilities and looked at a variety of different things, but we gave them a rating 1 through 5. 1 basically indicates needing prompt attention to 5, and I'll show you the structure right here. And this is just an illustration of one of the schools in no particular order, but what we did is there's a report. It's fairly beefy in height, but there's a report for each school. We have a summary page that kind of gives you all the necessary data, grade structure, student population, when it was built, type of construction. So it kind of gives you a good snapshot of what you have in your facilities, if it's connected to sewer, if it's on septic, those kinds of things. And then, and you'll see kind of this theme as we move through the description of each of the schools is what we came up with, because many of your facilities, except with the exception for one, have been added to or renovated multiple times. So what you'll see in plans and in the reports is we called it vintage, and you'll see that in the structure here where we rated the condition based on the vintage of the portion of the building that existed, so that you can kind of clearly see the conditions of each portion of the building. Then obviously documented, photo logged so that you could see our written description tied to existing photos, and then key plans and plan diagrams to just make sure that the content, the narratives connected to the floor plan diagrams. So that's a snapshot of what is contained for each school, and then there's a thick binder report for all of the facilities. So here's a summary of each of the buildings, all 7, the year they were built or years that they were built and added to, and you can kind of see a consistent theme with exception to Squadron. The current age, just so I didn't have to do the math in my head, but the current age, you can see about every 10, 15 years or so, there was either addition or renovation to one of the facilities. You can see the current enrollment, so you have 5 K to 6 or pre-K to 6, including Squadron, and then the existing area or square footage. So just kind of a matrix, and you'll see a snapshot of that on each of the schools. So rather than kind of repeat some of the consistent findings, we summarize them into a couple of slides. And we wanted to first start with, the facility's been well maintained over the years, over the variety of years. So, but no facility has received a comprehensive renovation since its original construction. And you'll understand that a bit better as we move through the details of each of the schools. Safety and security, a real solid plan that's either ongoing or in place for secure vestibule locks, security cameras, view around the perimeter of the buildings. So good kind of plan in place for that is either ongoing, in place, but so that's a positive. From the site access control and visibility, there are some improvements, like for instance, the ability to travel around the building. Vehicles the ability to travel around the building is something that can easily be addressed, that should be addressed. Accessibility compliance upgrades, for every facility basically are required, but they're at various different levels. Some are more significant than others. Some may be push-pull clearances to get into rooms, meaning, you need to have a certain distance in the door to get those through the actual opening, to not having an elevator to get to an entire second floor of a building. So, majority of the structural systems are in fair and good condition, so there's no, structural engineer walk through, so there's no real significant deterioration or deficiencies that were noted from the visual observations, which is a good thing. Programmatically, the educators have basically maximized almost every square inch of each of the facilities. So you are getting good value, getting good use out of the square footage that is available to you in your facilities, in your elementary facilities. The core facilities, meaning toilet cores, the cafeteria, in some instances, the kitchens, gymnasiums, media centers. It's not consistent, but meaning, one media center might be new, but the gymnasium may be old. There's the need to address the core facilities of each of the educational buildings is noted in detail here. A majority of the facilities have been added to partially or partially renovated. So that means that you've been paying attention to the buildings, which is a great thing. The challenge that it creates is it leaves a complex composition of new and old. Meaning, you may have put in a new electrical service, but the distribution, all the wires around the building are old, or some of them are new and some of them are old. So it does create a little bit of a problem. Obviously, the exception is Squadron. And another positive piece is there has been a methodical approach to building systems infrastructure upgrades, meaning, going through and looking at life safety, fire alarms, fire suppression systems. So they've, the community is taking on a year-by-year look and trying to address major systems, which is a good thing. The challenge becomes it hasn't been comprehensive in nature. And programming, and I think this is just a statement because of some of the age and vintage of the facilities, mentioned core facility, but the ability to integrate flexible and intervention and specialized educational areas. I think there was a question relative to that topic earlier on the demographics. Just the way we teach has changed a little bit, so you're seeing smaller group teaching, a little bit more personalization, a little bit more discovery in the educational curriculum, which requires a variety of spaces or flexibility in spaces, which becomes a little bit of a challenge in some of the older buildings because they were built a certain way. Okay, so we're going to go through all 7 schools, and again, it's a couple slides each school, hitting the highlights. Rest assured that we have full detail behind you. They're in no particular order. They're actually in the order that we walked through them. But each of these slides for each school is set up on, we call it a vintage plan. And you can see here, this is Terrafil Elementary. The original construction, 1925, and then was added to in 59. Again, modulars were added in the back in 1986, and then there was an addition for the cafeteria area and kitchen in 2009. So pretty tight site, fairly good separation from bus and parent drop-off, just not a lot of capacity for parking. So the key findings at this school on the site are there's some drainage areas at play areas that make use of the portions of the site that can be used difficult during the swing seasons, or late, in fall and then spring when it becomes wet. And then access control, I mentioned generally speaking, but access control to the rear of this facility is something that really should be looked at, and it can be resolved relatively easily. Building exterior, there's a small portion back steel canopy that needs to be repaired. Envelope repairs overall, because of the various different vintages, need to be addressed. Repointing, windows. Again, there's been kind of I'll call it methodical approach to replacing windows and doors, but not comprehensive. Interior, antiquated and inefficient storage. So some of the millwork, for example, in the original buildings is just old, antiquated, doesn't meet compliance. So it's reached its end of useful life is what we like to term it as. This particular building, which is the view on the top there, top left, has no ADA access, doesn't have an elevator to the entire second floor. So that's a flag that we raised here, and it's a key finding. Modular construction, for those that are familiar with the school, access to is through the gymnasium, which doesn't really work well from a flow perspective and educational perspective. And then the condition itself, sometimes you have more wildlife living in there than you have students occupied. So it does need to be addressed. But new heating, electrical, fire alarm, fire protection in 2009, so those are the items that were kind of addressed. Generator in 2007. There's been this program to try to air condition spaces and kind of in a balanced approach to all the facilities. So we have limited air conditioning. There's not just a system taking care of that. And then just the combination of the new and old distributions makes it, for anybody that's in the trades, makes it very difficult to try to address renovations and future renovations, and limits flexibility. Okay, Tooten Hills. Again, site plan, you can see the various different vintages. This one has good bus parent separation, good visibility. The play areas are kind of somewhat protected. There needs to be some revisions and adaptations to correct a few areas, but one of the net results of trying to get the most value out of your buildings by adding to and trying to preserve and renovate is you end up with a facility, an elementary school facility that has a tremendous distance from one end of the building to the other. And any of those folks that have or had children, to get a little one from one end of the building to the other, in this particular case, may be one or two bathroom breaks in between. So what that does, so the key finding, what that does is it think about it, it takes away from the time that should be spent in the classroom. So it consumes time away from the classroom. So that's a key finding that we highlighted. But from a site perspective, drainage and play areas, there's some areas that need to be addressed. And then access control to the rear play areas is something that should be looked at and can be somewhat easily addressed. Building exterior, this one in particular, there's some basement water penetration, water issues that should be addressed so that it doesn't create long-term issues. But the building envelope, is really, most of it has reached its end of useful life. Single pane windows, there's doors that need to be replaced, caulk joints. So again, you get good value out of them. It's just they're reaching that time where they need to be addressed comprehensively. Building interior, core facility, renovate core facilities, the gymatorium, or however you want to term it, but the multi-use space that's mostly a gym. The condition of that, particularly the flooring, I know that's been an issue that's been discussed at length at various different budget meetings, I think, in the past, is something that we highlighted here, that really a comprehensive look at renovation of the core facilities is needed. Heating plant, 2016 is good. Electrical, fire alarm, fire protection, and generator in 2000, so good. Limited air conditioning, again, combination of new and old. And in this particular example, steam heat, so that's a tough one there. Squadron line, so one color, built in 1969, basically 50 years old. You don't see it on the bottom of the screen, but there's one, and for those familiar with this site, one entrance point for both bus and parent that does create some issues. After that, there's, so at the bottom of the screen, there's one entrance point where both parent and bus come in. From there, they separate. To the right on this plan is parent, on the left is bus. But that crunch point does create some issues from a logistics and operational standpoint. The other item on the site perspective, off to the left of the screen, is the remote play areas. So students go out and have remote play. It's quite a bit of distance away from, with exception of the one on the top right. They use the one on the left side quite a bit. So, let me just jump back one other piece. There's a connector, so the left side, the donut that you see on the left side is the classroom portion, the typical classroom portion. You can see it's a pretty deep building. There's no courtyard in the middle. So which that limits the use of and penetration of natural daylight on that side. And then on the right side, top right, is the cafeteria, med, admin, all the core spaces. And they're connected by this ramp. So this left side is 2-story, and it's connected by the split ramp, which you see in the next image. Well, that ramp runs from one end to the other and is not does not meet current ADA compliance because of so you're kind of stuck because they start and end right at the end, so you got to come up with a solution there. That's a piece that we've highlighted as a key finding in this particular example. So site, I've already addressed on this one. Building exterior, so, when you're getting close to 50 years old, you got to get some work done. This really has had limited renovations to it, so there's building envelope concerns like roofs, windows, door caulking, those kinds of things. It was well-built. It's a brick, a block, steel frame structure, so it's well-built, so you got good life out of it. It's starting to show its signs of age. Building interior, I mentioned no major renovations, no easy fix to the ramp. The classroom portion of the building was built in most areas, and some have been modified, where there was modular walls, so the walls didn't go all the way up, so the acoustics between one classroom to the next are a bit of a challenge, particularly when there's specialized educational spaces next to louder classrooms, for example, or a choral or band. So it's something to identify and address. Lack of daylight, I already mentioned. Core facilities, particularly the gym, again, needs to be looked at. Overall, new heating plant, 2015, which is a good thing, but distributions are original. So antiquated setup as far as the exhaust and fresh air design, and then limited air conditioning. So original electrical service, big item here, original electrical service and no fire protection system. The reason back then why they didn't have it is because of the type of construction that they built it with. It's brick, block, steel. Nowadays, that's just, you need a fire protection system, so we've highlighted it here. So, and that's why the communities, the town has gone through and tried to address fire alarm and fire suppression in a large majority of their buildings, when they can, when budget allows. Latimer Lane, most of the building in 1962, 1996, there was an addition, I think a 3-classroom addition. Why they didn't connect the building, I'm not quite sure. Creates a similar condition to, I think, Teuton's, where the travel distances start to become a problem or a challenge. So from a site perspective, again, some of the play area drainage issues that should be addressed. Parking, starting to see some drainage concerns, catch basins, asphalt, those kinds of things. Building exterior, there's a variety again of roof, windows, doors that have reached their end of useful life. Some have been replaced, some haven't. So there's an inconsistent building envelope that also compounds the energy consumption of these buildings as well. Building interior, rear portion of the building. So what lower left here, there's a stair right in that middle connecting corridor. So, and there's no ramp or lift or anything to get down to it. So there is no current compliant ADA accessibility to the rear portion of the building without having to go out and around. Highlighted in this. Sprawling footprint, as I mentioned. Original heating plant in 1962, original distribution systems, and then there's some limited air conditioning. So original electrical service and no fire protection. So from a building system standpoint, it needs some work. Central Elementary, the last of the elementaries that we'll go through. One of the oldest, 1913, or the oldest. 1950 addition in the middle, and then the most recent 1997 addition in this building of all the elementaries, I think is in, from a condition assessments, and it's in relatively good shape. There are some concerns, let me jump back real quick. Although this doesn't show the whole site, there are some relatively important concerns when it comes to the site. Separation of bus and parent drop-off is key. It should be addressed as soon as we can come up with a comprehensive plan for this site because of the pedestrian access from parent parking to the building, from bus drop-off to the building, the sidewalks and access ways, the circulation that you can see the bus loop is there. All of these things kind of compound themselves if you encourage you to stand there at dismissal and just observe, because it is quite a challenge. All can be addressed relatively easily, we believe, with some planning, proper planning with connections to other town-owned properties that might ease some of these circulation issues. Building exterior, for the vintage, it's in relatively decent shape. There are some concerns relative at the cafeteria area where they added to the original building some flashing issues, and then some trim and flashing issues at the 1997 edition, but areas that we've identified that you need to fix so that they don't become major issues. Building interior, there's just a small portion that's not accessible due to a stair. We want to note that. Relocate, so there's mechanical equipment that probably was in mechanical rooms at the time, but is now in educational space. So we need to look at that, see if we can address it, because it doesn't present the optimal educational environment. So we listed that there. There's probably two or three rooms. Those are all identified in the report. The basement of the original construction isn't currently used. It's, we like to call it lower level instead of basement, so I should have changed that. But consider it for non-educational use. Maybe administrative functions could be down there, and maybe free up some of the space on the main level for educational curriculum. So something to consider. 2 heating plants, 97, 2005. Again, challenges, we put this one in quotes because it truly is vintage distribution systems. And the challenge with that is, some of these systems are so old that the part, if something were to go, the fix is complicated at best. No generator, sprinklers were installed in the 1997 addition renovation, and fire alarm in 2012. Okay, so the last 2 buildings, stick with me here, I'm moving through. Henry James Memorial, this one was a bit difficult because it's currently under renovation, and addition and renovation. Vintages, you can see 57 and 59 relatively close together are the main portion of the building. 2000 in the rear. And then what we did is we ghosted in the auditorium addition and then the media center addition in that general vicinity. There's ongoing, those additions, there's ongoing renovations to some of the classrooms and the science areas and other portions as well. But so some of the items that we've identified will be addressed as a part of that project, some won't be. So we're in the process of kind of making sure it's clear in our report that it, so you understand what's going to be left. But again, it's not a comprehensive renovation of that facility. So pavement drainage improvements are needed throughout. I already mentioned the ongoing additions. Building, so there'll be some toilet cores that probably will need to be addressed, some millwork that will need to be addressed, some areas of ceilings, some of the areas of kitchen equipment. There's a new freezer going in, but the kitchen equipment isn't being addressed. So just be aware that even though there's a project going on, it's not touching all of it. So that'll be in the report, so you understand what that is. Heating plant 2014, portions of the original vintage will remain today, will remain then. Electrical service in 2000, no generator, original distribution systems, and then partial fire protection, but that will be addressed in the renovation project. So, last one, high school. This had a comprehensive renovation mostly comprehensive renovation in 2005. So the blues were the additions. The 68 original construction is in that brown. There were some small portions off the top right that were added in 1982. I think this is the shop. And then the 2001 was modulars. That's currently used for a alternative program and some administrative functions as well. So we tried to boil the findings down after the walkthroughs and discussions with the educators, boil it down to some specifics for this school. So from a site perspective, there's some isolated areas of sidewalk and ramp improvements needed at the entry. And then the student drop-off on the north side, or I call it the back side of the building, needs some drainage improvements because it's relatively flat. I think it was a hops or a bog, so the drainage is tough. It's relatively flat, so it's hard to get pitch. So in the winter, it creates some challenges because that's where most of the students are dropped off in the rear portion of the site. Site and building, the moisture concerns at the south wall, so in the front side of the building, top view there. The original building, you can see on in the foreground. There's some moisture concerns. I think it comes down the hill, relatively easily fixed with a trench drain, French drain, tied to drainage, but we don't want that water going inside the building because it'll create more problems. Other areas, roof replacement, believe it's starting to be or currently in planning. Locker and toilet facilities need to be addressed, weren't addressed in any of the previous renovations. And then consider removal or replacement of the modulars. And then there's some minor concerns at our area that I think we found the fix for. So heating plant 2005, limited AC throughout, that we know it's hot on the third floor. We've heard that quite a bit. We've heard it from previous staff, administration. We've heard it throughout. So we have some suggestions in the report to try to address it through the roof replacement potentially, maybe more insulation, maybe there's more exhaust if you can't afford a full AC renovation. So we're going to give you some options there. Electrical, fire sprinkler, alarm, all completed in 2005, and then the majority of the distribution systems were replaced in 2005. So thank you for sitting with me here to go through the existing conditions. This piece is very important because it kind of sets the foundation for understanding the condition and where you can make some informed decisions about the options that the community wants to consider in the future. So what to expect, we're finalizing that. We have another meeting tomorrow just to make sure dates our act is together as far as the report. We'll submit that. We're going to prioritize, we're going to get you costs, a matrix that we're going to work closely with him on to make sure that it's in the format that you need. It's a living document so that if things need to shift from year to year, they can. Then the fun begins where we're going to start developing options for reconfiguration. It could be additions, it could be new. We don't know yet where we're headed with that. What is important is to get this out there first to understand what we're working with. We're going to review the options with the community probably in the early fall, work on some options over the summer, but constant communication with the community through these public forums that I'm sure we'll have much more interaction with. And then finalize a master plan, prioritize some projects, fall, winter, so we can turn up that dial or turn it back if the community wants. We'll see what the response is. So what tonight's about is just, I think, it's the foundation, just to try to absorb what you heard. You've done a good job trying to maintain and update what you can with the budget you have, but there's a lot of the areas have reached their end of useful life, and you need to have a comprehensive plan to attack this. We do want to hear from you, your concerns, your perspective. It's really an open platform for questions, concerns, opinions. We are at the beginning stages, and we want to hear the good, the bad, anything. And I'll leave this up. It's what we want to hear is, why did you attend? What's important to you? What do you think? What do you see as a priority? Do you agree with our assessment? Do you think that they're in good shape, bad shape? What works well? Where's the greatest need? So these are just here to provoke. We want to hear as much as we can, because that'll help shape some of the options for the fall when we come back. So, thank you. Sure. Do you want me to?
Somebody want to do this?
I recruit.
Jeff, I have a question. I saw a lot of the comments as it related to the site issues from a drainage perspective and stuff as it related to maybe some of the hardscapes. Did you look at playscapes and sports fields as part of the assessment?
Yes, we did. And those are illustrated in the detail of the report, and so the answer is yes. They're set up in parking, drive aisles, and play areas, both hard and soft playscapes, so all of that is addressed. Yep.
So, full disclosure, I'm on Simsbury's Clean Energy Task Force, and I have an agenda here tonight, okay? I guess mostly this is a comment in terms of how you go forward with capital improvement program, how you evaluate alternatives. So I want to urge you to take a good hard look at CapEx versus lifelong OpEx as you develop your CIP. you know, we have an institutional inertia here. We know how to build a school, we know how to renovate classrooms, we know how to do this, and there's a way, right? Engineers that design these things have books. They go back and they look at books. I'm an engineer, I know how to do that. Where that falls apart is our world's changing. You know, and I'm not going to go jump up on the climate change and thump my shoe on the floor or whatever, but this is a reality. Our kids, the kids that we're educating in these systems, are growing up in this world. So we have a duty not just to do the best we can to alleviate those concerns, but also to educate them and make them a part of this. So as an example, you're looking at Simsbury High, we're going to replace the whole roof. CTF collaborated with the town, we got a small solar array up there. It's taking some of the load. What can we do when we replace the roof? You know, what can we do long-term? What's it going to cost CapEx? What's it going to alleviate OpEx? And what are the intangibles? You know, what are the externalities for the kids? Can we build in dashboards? Can we have the kids do projects around how their energy is generated, how we save energy? These things are so doable, but it requires a change in mindset. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, but I want to make damn sure that you're thinking about this stuff as you go forward. Thank you. I yield my time.
Yeah, message received. Derek would jump up. He's our mechanical engineer. That is at the forefront of our thought process and will be addressed as we move along. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm Sharon Byron, and I went to Central School. Okay, so I really appreciate the depth, but to be highly supportive of that last comment, because I was not really prepared to really speak on this, I want you to take a very hard look at Bill McClay Architects. I don't want to see any more generators because we're going to have battery power. I want to see absolutely clean air for our children inside the schools, because we're going to need that with the present climate change issue. And I am sure that you can design these schools so we do not have to have an oil bill at all, because we have split air ducts, we have other types of heating systems, and we can make it a net zero plus energy building, as Bill McClay Architects has done with a study in Vermont, and has built a school. So, as the engineer said, this is not new stuff. And actually, my science project when I was 12 at Simsbury High School spoke to this on how we could live on Mercury, but we're going to have to apply it to how we live here. So I really want you, moving forward, to know that Simsbury is the only one in the United States, and therefore a really decent project. And we have Westminster School in town as a model of energy efficiency and geothermal heating, and the best pool in the state, because I swim there every day. So we have the models, and I hope that that is integrated into the next generation. Presently, my 4 kids have moved out of state, so I get to see Seattle, Colorado, North Carolina, and Boston. But if any come back here to stay, I'd like them to have a wonderful school. And for that population that's here, I want them to see that. So I want to be highly supportive, but this is going to require a huge education plan to move in a different direction for the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm also on the Clean Energy Task Force, and I'm also, what? Yes, we're here. I'm also on the Sustainability Committee. The town of Simsbury recently registered as part of the Sustainable Connecticut program as a municipality, and therefore energy efficiency is really at the top of the list, as well as incorporating anything sustainable, whether it has to do with the building envelope, or the surrounding area, and incorporating educational opportunities with these changes, looking at all energy efficient options from solar flowers in the parking lot to a green roof with a garden. And food composting should really be considered because the schools are the largest food waste producers, and there's some really wonderful opportunities there. We have a lot of assistance that we can tap into as far as resources to assist with these programs. So we hope that you'll possibly collaborate with not only the groups that I'm a member of, but there's a lot of knowledge amongst the different committees that Simsbury does have. And so we really want to see sustainability at the top of the list. And my last one item, if there was one item, I would say would be the traffic flow at dismissal at the high school. Should change.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the question prompts. So I attended tonight because I'm a mom of 2 girls at Latimer Lane. I'm also, my background is in public health, so my name is Katie Boyle. So I've been an advocate on various issues, including bears in town, and wherever possible I can chime in. I have spoken with our principal about security upgrades at length, and I know there was a separate report, but I'm curious to know what impact security, how much security improvements weighted your report, like or assessed in the report. And also my two issues are security of schools and then environmental health. So you've mentioned like kind of umbrella, the envelope, but like, there's probably some ducts that have some mold in them, is that covered in detail in your report, or are you capable of the environmental health assessment that I'm kind of speaking of, or was that not part of the review?
So we didn't do an environmental air testing.
Okay.
But we did comment on the mechanical systems, the amount of fresh air, where the fresh air comes from.
Okay.
Does it meet code? Those kinds of things related to that.
And then I know you mentioned moisture, that.
Right, and so then our job is our assessment of the conditions is based on visual observations. So like take for example the high school where we saw concerns that lead us to there must be moisture, something's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go look at it and then we comment on it and then we put in the report as to what could remediate that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because so the answer is yes, based on visual observations of those.
So you're
things.
engineers, is that right? You're an
The
engineering
gentleman
firm?
over there,
Okay.
can probably speak to more detail if you want to come up and speak to that. He can also speak to the security upgrades from a equipment systems perspective. The community has made, an investment in trying to get the secure Sally ports, the entry features, the cameras. You can speak to that, and then our report reviewed the vulnerability reports that were provided, but also, I touched on it on the site, but we have a more detailed presentation where I talk about simple things like, putting up a gate or a fence for visitors during the day when off of the hectic drop-off and pickup to contain visitors' deliveries to an area so that you kind of funnel them through to the administration. So we've talked about, and what we call that is CEPTED principles, crime prevention through environmental design, just simple techniques, not systems and cameras and things, but simple, I guess, design elements that you can incorporate to try to enhance the level of security. So.
And what you do is in concert with the experts that did the review
Yeah,
previously,
so we
it's not like
provided those reports.
two separate.
Right,
Okay.
we provided those reports. We'll make those reports part of our appendix, and we've commented on, most of those comments have been fairly consistent from campus to campus. And then from a technical standpoint, I'll back off and let the engineering.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So again, my name's Derek Bride. I'm with Consulting Engineering Services. We did the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, and safety and security assessments on the project. Jeff is correct. He did steal a little bit of my thunder, but we did talk about in the report. You'll see what are the mechanical systems. How is the fresh air being brought into the building? You have a wide variety in your town of different systems, as Jeff touched base with in the original presentation. You have everything from some of your older schools where you're a completely exhausted facility and don't have any active mechanical ventilation. You're just pulling that infiltration in through your windows, which was very common in the vintages of the 60s and the 70s. And then you have some newer ones in your high school where you're bringing mechanical ventilation and you're filtering that air before it comes in the building. So you'll be seeing that all in the report. That's all detailed out by the buildings about what you currently have. As for safety and security, we talk about in the report your access control along with your video surveillance. You have a very comprehensive access control and video surveillance system in the town. You're continuing to add cameras when needed and make sure that you have your access control in all the facilities. You do have a program right now with your entrance vestibules and what people like to call a man lock. I know you have a plan to do them in every one of your schools. Jeff touched based on that briefly. So you're working on that security piece throughout. So you'll see a lot of this detail in the assessment for what you have in your facilities.
And that report is available to us, or it's coming? What is the?
It's going to be coming.
Okay.
We're meeting with the town tomorrow, one more time to kind of, like Jeff said, finalize the dates. You've done a lot of projects that have been independent of your major renovations. So we want to make sure that we have all that captured in our report so you know what you've done and when you've done it accurately.
And then asbestos, can you touch on that? Whether or not there is and what the.
So we didn't touch upon that in the report. I believe you have the HERA reports identifying, where it's located in the facility. So, we could talk about including that as an addendum, or they're public files, so those are.
And I believe as parents, we're able to be notified if we let the town know.
Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah.
We have a whole asbestos management
Yeah.
system
Yeah.
that is available.
Okay, awesome. Come on down.
I am a fan of the school system and have 5 kids that have gone through or in process of going through. My request on top of everything else that we've talked about is just that the master plan reflect where is education going to help best prepare Simsbury students to be global citizens. I don't know if it looks like open space learning. I know my husband's business environment has just gone to the open space concept, whatever. Online technology use. I'm not an expert, but I would hope that we would aim toward where the best learning is going. Also consider the impact that the housing developments are going to probably yield a more diverse student population, which I welcome, but it may invite different types of environments structurally to encourage interactions and learnings and so forth. And I just would, of course, expect that you would get teacher input as the experts on what would be my wish list.
Absolutely. So we've had, I think, 1 or 2 workshops with some of kind of the leadership representing some of the faculty members. We'll have more of those as we develop the options. And to answer your first question, would also be on the trends. So we'll make sure that we highlight some of the trends that we've seen, the possibilities of integrating them into your school, what needs to be done in order to do that. So those will be kind of woven into some of the options that we have. So, thank you.
Hi, I have 2 kids at Terrafil, and my wife is also the music teacher at Terrafil, so there's probably a little bit of bias there in favor of good working conditions for my wife, but keep in mind that these are also the learning conditions for the kids. And since I mentioned what she teaches, you probably know I'm talking about the modulars. Yeah. And so every kid in the school goes down there once or twice a week for music class, and also some of them are there for the older kids for band and orchestra, and some kids for occupational, physical, speech therapy, social worker, stuff like that. So we were very encouraged. I'm used to talking loudly in a mic. We were very encouraged to priority. And I just kind of wanted to go into a little more detail about them and I saw a different version of this PowerPoint on the website in one spot where you said, just replace the modulars. In another spot, you said replace modulars or take care of wildlife. I'm not sure that taking care of wildlife will work. We've had animal control out there several times and they often haven't been able to do anything about it. And I don't know if you have ever given your wife a hug and had her smell like skunk, but it's not pleasant. So, you know, if it were possible to just do the wildlife and keep the modulars, I might be happy, but I don't know that it is. But there's other things about the modulars as well. So, it seemed like you said you were at Terrafil first, so I'm not sure what time of year that is, but maybe January, February? Okay. Okay, so there's depending on the weather, there's different issues there. And speaking of energy efficiency, I mean, there have been times when we were unable to shut off either the AC or the heat, and she had to open the windows so the kids wouldn't pass out. You know, so that's not acceptable for energy efficiency. So just, I wanted to say, you're right to put those as a high priority to get rid of. So thank you for, and, you know, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Hi. Great presentation. I'm a Latimer Lane parent, so I was very interested in your findings there. And I am the PTO president. Is that what you want to say? Anyway, I just also wanted to agree that the stairs and the lack of the connection and the addition have never made any sense to us, so we definitely agree those are priorities, as the gymnatorium. Definitely bad shape, so appreciate your findings there.
Sure.
So thank you.
Thanks.
I'll try not to get too close. Mine is not a question or an observation on what you've done thus far, but it's more a question to you and the Board of Education in terms of your work going forward with the options. Are you dealing with a blank slate, or do you have some conditions that have been set in terms of particular schools, particular situations? How blank is your slate?
So to answer it from our perspective is why because the options. So first off, we don't have any preconceived notions about why we think getting a good comprehensive analysis of both demographics and existing conditions is because I think it's going to help us inform decisions on how we develop the options. And part of the connection with the community and the dialogue is right now, I like to say it, and some people don't like to hear it, but it's easy to put it on paper. It's easy to put the options on paper to talk about. So any number of options we'll create. It's going to be based on capacity of schools. It's going to be based on demographics. It's going to be based on the condition of the building. Do the core facilities support an expansion? So what you're going to see when we start developing the options is we're going to have to kind of create a matrix of how we evaluate the options and rate them. And that's what the dialogue with the community is going to be. What's more important? Is it an emotional connection to a building? Is it energy savings, like we heard? Is it, getting all new schools so that, you know, you can address every single one of the design of the trends in education. We're gonna analyze, we're gonna put up there all these kind of, like a scorecard of all these kind of categories and weight them. And we're at a point now where, yes, we're gonna bring something to the table as far as options and tell you how we got there. But ultimately, what typically happens with, like, through our experience is, if we're doing our job right, the options are kind of gonna be created by themselves, by the feedback that we hear from the community, by the educators, by the facilities. It's gonna start to make more sense. Now, not everybody's gonna agree on that, but at least you're gonna have, you know, the development of viable options, and then becomes the discussion as to what makes the most sense. So, short answer is blank slate, but we need to make informed decisions about the options. We just don't want to create an option because we can. So, I don't think there's a speaker anymore.
Can I still moderate? You can moderate. To carry on a little bit with that topic, I know a lot of the buildings have had additions and renovations over years, and they serve a function. It might meet the enrollment needs of the number of kids that are going to be in the schools, but they're old.
Yeah.
And to replace an entire building is costly, as we all know. We have a lot of elementary schools. The idea of the distance between, you know, for the traveling distance for the student, yes, we can add on and add on and add on.
Absolutely.
And just make the problem even worse.
Yeah.
And you'll have 6, 7 iterations to that building. But the idea of a clean slate, are we really going to look at a master plan that could potentially replace all the elementary schools as an option?
Potentially, yes. Yeah, I think there's going to be, you know, to throw out some more ideas are, you know, we're going to look at grade configuration and see what makes sense there. We're going to look at combination of new, add, old. There may be, you know, maybe we just look at an option to just bring every one of your schools up to code, into speed, into condition. What is that going to cost you compared to if you look at, I don't know, maybe do we combine a couple schools? Is there energy efficiency? Is there operational efficiencies in that? So all of those elements we're going to look at, a macro level look at options. And, you know, we may hit the mark on our first presentation in the community, and, you know, maybe you like all 4, 5, 6, maybe we missed 3 or 4, that's okay. So we're going to look at, I would say, all those kinds of options. Yep.
So first a comment and a question, they go together. Here we go. So I work in an industry that is constantly evolving technology-wise. It's media. And the nature of technology in education and media and all facets of life continues to evolve. And one everlasting truth is it keeps getting smaller and more efficient. To sit in a school classroom today and see a presentation using a smartboard that when I was in 5th grade would have seemed like the moon, which was more time ago than I care to admit, is beyond antiquated. But it is really at the limits of what the physical capacity of these buildings can really support. That there isn't really anything truly innovative that you see in new high-tech companies in terms of smart walls, not smart boards, things of that nature, things that we haven't even thought up yet.
Yep.
And in addition to that,
Use the mic.
in addition to that, the nature of physical media, okay, and I love books. When you're planning out a new building, do you need the same size library? Because the entire knowledge on Earth can be accessed through the cloud, not just through 4,000 titles in an elementary school library. How much, so this leads to the question, how much is that, from a technology perspective, would go into thinking holistically about redoing these buildings, whether they're from scratch or a substantial renovation, that keeps these things in mind, that the physical space needed to do some of these things either needs to be completely transformed or is no longer necessary, or at least to the same degree it was, and how much, as part of this process, is looking around certainly the country, but even the world, for best practices about how these things are being done in any manner, in whether it's California or Norway or Japan, who cares, so that we're at the cutting edge. Because one of the things that has drawn me to this town 14 years ago, 15 years ago, was the school system. I don't want to see that edge change.
Yeah.
So being innovative technologically, to say nothing of all of the other things that were mentioned today, which I wholeheartedly agree with in terms of environmental and other issues, if we're not at the cutting edge of technology innovations in these spaces, eventually it's not going to matter whatever else we do, because no one will live here.
Yeah, that's a challenge that we discuss almost daily in our designs, is the built-in flexibility or ability to adapt your spaces to evolving technologies. We know what's in front of us, and we can try to plan for. But so there's a couple things. The answer, one of the questions in there, I think, was analyzing and understanding the educational trends, where it's headed, what the future of education is a piece. Then, once you understand and think, is this the direction? Then the next discussion is, how do you build in flexibility when that changes? Because it's going to change. And then the overlay of like the actual end device, whatever it may be. Right now, it's interactive boards. It might end up being by, 3 years from now, and it might be an interactive wall. You don't know, but the way that we've approached the design piece is to try to build in, smart thinking from a creative space planning, flexibility in the design itself, and then from a building system standpoint, it's building in when and if you get there, it's building in some flexibility in the infrastructure, because you need some kind of infrastructure to provide that flexibility. That's what we try to spend our time on, because if we spend our time on trying to plan for what we think is going to be in a classroom or in our space, by the time it's built, it's 3 years later, it's going to be completely different. So we focus on infrastructure from a technology device standpoint, and then from a design perspective, it's acknowledging there are design trends, trying to ferret out which ones make the most sense for your strategic vision, and then trying to build in adaptability and flexibility. So it's kind of a loose answer to your question, but I hear that. Yeah. There's a wide spectrum, so I think trying to make sure you hear all of it and see all of it, but kind of, we want to do what's right for Simsbury, like what for your community, for Simsbury. So, taking that wide spectrum and trying to see what makes sense with a plan that I think is already, created from a curriculum standpoint, or at least is evolving. I think that's where there's not enough dialogue right now, to be honest with you. Yeah.
It's definitely the same sort of thing with all the options. Is we're going to be broad in terms of the precedents that we look at. We'll bring in all sorts of things. We'll throw them and see what sticks to the wall. Not all of it necessarily may be something that you gravitate towards, but at least to be able to see it and see, whether that model makes sense or not for this environment.
Can you repeat the question?
I will.
I just want to say, I've lived in town for 30 years now, and I love this town. And everything I've heard sounds great, but very expensive. And I'm retired, living on a small pension, and please, I don't know if this is a comment to you or Eric or Matt and Tara, but please keep in mind the taxes. I have a small cape, and I'm paying $8,000 a year already, and our bonding is very high. So that's my comment. Just keep in mind for the retirees.
It's for recording only. Yeah, it works. Hi.
It's not turned on in here anymore, it's just recording for TV.
I think people can hear me, which is the important part. So I hear many nice comments about, so we should be ready for technology, and of course, we do renovation, should be the last thing just to be able to adapt to anything coming on. However, there are some things that probably I'm missing from the presentation, which is kind of understanding, so you are doing an inspection, looking at what's missing, what's the status, but kind of next steps, details about, so how far or when is, are you acting in doing these renovations or operations or future plans, kind of program of activities in some way.
Sure.
I would like to get more details on that. I don't know if you don't have that information, but in some way we are missing that.
Sure.
I need to say something, some things are kind of important, and I don't want to say urgent, but almost. So, for example, so I came from Texas a couple of years ago, moved here to town, and then when the classes start, I have two daughters in Totting Hills, and then suddenly the classes were canceled because it's too hot. And then I talked to some friends in Texas, and they said, did you move to Africa? They don't have air conditioning there? Of course, in Texas, everything has air conditioning, but I mean, it's kind of crazy that you don't have air conditioning, then kids need to go back to home. I mean, some things are important, and be adapted to technology is nice, but some others are kind of, come on. So if you can probably write down some dates.
Sure.
About what is done and when, so you can be prepared and work towards that.
Yeah, I agree, and I also walked uphill both ways to school, so. The schedule, the immediate next, so our charge, just to answer your question specifically, was to develop this master plan, which is inclusive of options, which we're gonna launch into. So that schedule will be, so we're gonna come back probably early fall with some options, another public forum, get some more ideas. There'll probably be a couple of those, and then start narrowing it down to kind of a master plan. And so that's our charge, is to give the community a master plan that they can use as a tool to plan out whether you're renovating, adding, just fixing. That's what that tool is gonna be. From there, if there's a major project, let's say, that becomes another process that you add on top of that, and that, without getting into specifics, is going to take years, to be honest with you. It'll take, you're gonna have to go through, approvals, you're gonna have to go through the state. So being upfront and honest, our scope, what we want to achieve is a master plan somewhere by end of year or early next year, if we can. If we need more time, we will take it. But from there, then you identify what that first project is or projects, and then you run with it. Some of them may be immediate, if they're fixes like windows, roofs, and things like that. If it's a major project like a addition or new, it's going to take years. So
Is the window air conditioning something immediate, or?
I just open them up. Yeah.
4 years, you think?
Took 4 years to build a library from the time we sat down and talked about this library to 82 to build it in 6.
So thank you for your questions. Any? Sure.
Yes, I'm Shauna, and I am the president for the Student Parent Teacher Council at the high school.
Okay.
And everyone has given so much great information. I love all the green and health conscious and everything like that, things that I probably wouldn't have thought of, but are super important for our kids. And pretty much all that I ever hear is the third floor air conditioning. So I'm speaking up for the kids and teachers at the high school.
Yeah.
And that's about it for the high school, I guess.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything you can do about the parking and the leaving the school at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
what you could do.
Certainly better understand it, because that, I think, is one of the first times I heard that, so we'll have
Yeah.
our civil engineers look at it. Yeah.
There's a fairly good separation between the buses and
Yeah.
and with the police officer there doing, directing traffic, it seems to be pretty good on that end.
Yep.
It's just the other end that doesn't seem to have
Okay.
anything going on. So maybe if there was a police officer on that end as well, that would help.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll note that. Thank you.
So this is much shorter. As you build your options, we talked about a little bit of a matrix, and you kind of rate them high, low. Are you going to be building a ROM cost model with that as well?
Mhm.
Because I
Yes.
think that would
Yep,
definitely.
absolutely.
How close do you plan on coming? Is it ROM or is it?
It's ROM. At the macro level, it's ROM.
Okay.
So scope, schedule, budget. That's the options that you're gonna see. You need to know those. Huh?
Sorry, ROM is rough order of magnitude. Because it's conceptual.
High-level cost estimates of what is it gonna, to your point earlier, how much is it gonna cost? How much are we gonna get from the state, if anything? What does it mean to me?
We only know the educational acronyms.
Like going off the matrix, if there does end up being a matrix of some sort, if there
Yeah.
could be a mathematical way of like assessing and weighting so that it's clear to us how things are being weighted and or maybe giving us the option to weight each individual improvement that's in the matrix, that would be wonderful. Or a subset of people, whatever, me included. And then kids being able to physically like withstand the day at school, obviously that is the third one. So environmental health,
Yep.
security, and then being able to withstand the day and not be drenched in sweat. That's my third concern.
Yeah, just quickly, are we bound, excuse me, sir?
Yep, sorry. Security. Sorry, I was just.
Yeah, when you have to build to code is antique in Connecticut. So are you building performance-wise in general? I mean, can we think in those terms, I guess?
Connecticut's not bad when it comes to progressive codes. Any state reimbursed project will have to follow the high performance guidelines, which I think are also evolving. I don't know what they're gonna amend them, I think, relatively soon.
I mean,
There's
to
a
hear
new,
about this problem with the high school, it's like, that's like the newest building. So it really
Yeah.
sounds like someone was short-sighted someplace along the way, but that's not being handled properly right now.
the story of
So-
when the state
Okay,
required
thank
AC. Wasn't that before the high
Yeah,
school
so
project?
the high school project was done roughly a decade ago, right? I mean, a little bit longer than that at this point. The state of Connecticut at that time did not mandate that every school be installed with air conditioning. That mandate was put into effect about 3 or 4 years ago, that all new schools have to be installed with air conditioning in them. So the codes and the standards are evolving. With the high school being...
Children need clean air, and, my daughter had sports asthma, I'm just using the filter at home, real simple, so.
No, I'm not
We're doing that now.
No, I'm not disagreeing that schools need to have a great indoor air quality. When we look at our schools nowadays, we're always trying to put in mechanical ventilation. We are always putting in mechanical ventilation. We're filtering that air. We're using energy recovery systems to recover the energy in that air. We're heating, cooling, dehumidifying it. We're monitoring CO2. So we're doing a lot of newer technologies in the newer schools nowadays. That's all being mandated by the state. But you are correct. You always want to look at what's coming in the future, and we're always trying to put that in. Jeff and I have been doing a lot of schools over the years, and the more we meet with communities like yourself, we're hearing the same message across the state. It's make our school more efficient, make their indoor air quality better for a learning environment for our students. So we're hearing that message, not just from you, but from everyone across the state. So it's something that we're really looking into. And then most notably, you talked briefly about the net zero aspects, and that's now a new buzzword. It was in California, it's in Boston, and it's coming to Connecticut. So no, it's definitely something we're understanding on the design side, that message globally, and we're definitely going to listen to you for what matters for Simsbury especially. Solar power is possible in any school you would like to do it. It comes down to the capital expenditures and having the money to do it. But you could put solar on any school as long as your roof is relatively new, so you're not having to remove the solar to repair your roof in the future.
Just for the record, it's not just about capital expenditure. There are ways to not have capital expenditures to solar power.
You are correct.
I think that was it.
All right, thank you very much. Do you want to
Thank you
give?
so much for coming out. The feedback was really helpful, and this is certainly going to be a process where we'll be back together and communicating quite a bit